neurological disease. They have actually, for many years, they have discovered that fungus is very common in the central nervous system of people that are suffering with diseases like multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, ALS, and many other neurological diseases. And they know that fungus in the central nervous system triggers inflammation. So today we're going to be talking about some of the different types of fungi that are found in the central nervous system of people that suffer with neurological diseases, also the symptoms that they cause, and the treatments, the best treatments for treating fungal infections. If we haven't met, my name is Pam Bartha, and I'm the author of Become a Wellness Champion and the founder of Live Disease Free. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis over 30 years ago, actually over 35 years ago now. And it's truly by the grace of God that I learned very early on that multiple sclerosis is caused by parasites. And back in the day when I was first diagnosed in 1988, I first came across several different medically trained doctors that were talking about how multiple sclerosis was caused by fungus and fungal infections, and they really thought it had a lot to do with candida. So this has been known for 30 to 40 years. I'd say probably closer to 40 years. And it's crazy that it's taken this long to be able to that it's still being studied and nothing has ever changed. Nothing is getting better. So it's really important to keep talking about this. So I wanted to share with you some books that I read a long time ago when I was newly diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So this book, actually, let me go through the first one. The first one is The Yeast Connection by Dr. William Crook. And this was a medical doctor, again, 40 years ago, that was talking about how fungal infections, especially candida, was causing chronic disease. Then I came across, I don't know the order of the other doctors, but then I came across the missing diagnosis, which is actually let me just check to make sure that this is, yes, we're live. Awesome. So this is The Missing Diagnosis by Dr. Truss, Orion Truss. So that was another book by, these are all medical doctors that believe that fungus, candida, was causing neurological diseases. Let me know if you've heard of any of these books. Some of you might have heard of The Yeast Connection if you were diagnosed many years ago. This is another book written by, these are old, I've had them for like over 30 years. So this is a book by Dr. Luc de Schepper. He also believed that candida caused disease. And then finally, Canadian Dr. Rona. And Dr. Rona wrote this book, The Complete Candida Guidebook. So Complete Candida Yeast Guidebook. And he gives a lot of recipes, and he talks about how treating candida, treating fungus in his patients, and it didn't matter what disease, many different types of disease, including multiple sclerosis. So again, these books were written 30 to 40 years ago. I would say 35 to 40 years ago at least. And it's just shocking that we're still just talking about it. But I'm going to share with you a study that came out that I think is really amazing. So I just want to make sure that you guys can hear me. Type your questions in the question box. Make sure to say hi, because I just want to make sure that I am connected here. Let me just double check. Yes, I am. Perfect. All right. All right, so this study is a 2023 study, and before we talk about the findings of the different types of fungus that they're finding in our central nervous system, I wanted to share with you, like why are we seeing such an increased trend of fungus growing in our brains? Like, why is this happening? Like, what has changed? Can you guys tell me what you think has changed? Like a big thing in our environment, what has changed? Yes, there's more toxins, there's probably more stress, but there's one really big thing, and I wonder if any of you guys can pick it out. And it has something to do with our technology that we use. Maybe you guys can think of what that is. Well, basically, Dr. Klinghardt is one of the doctors that I study under, and he shared that, or he always likes to share research, and he shared research showing that the more wireless radiation that's around us, this is from our cell phones, our computers, our different devices we're using, even our printers, now even our appliances, TVs. So we've got this invisible radiation around us, and it actually makes infections grow a lot faster, produce a lot more poisons, but it also causes our blood brain barrier to be more leaky. And so there's actual studies where they're talking about how this really impacts our blood brain barrier permeability. And they're bragging about how they can use radiation to make our blood brain barrier leaky so that they can get drugs into our central nervous system easier, because sometimes they want the drugs to work in the central nervous system. So we are bombarded. It was like 2G, 3G, 4G, now we're up to 5G, and we have all of this wireless radiation around us all the time. And that is one of the factors that has really increased the permeability of our blood brain barrier. What that means is that normally we have this barrier that would prevent things, infections, parasites, toxins to cross into our brain. And that barrier has been compromised by, we know that certain microbes in our gut, I've shared some of the toxins they produce, they can definitely make our blood brain barrier more leaky, kind of like leaky gut. But there's also the wireless radiation, and I think that has a much greater impact on all of us, especially because many of us are exposed to the wireless radiation 24/7. So, so with this study, um, they have suggested, and they were talking about how it's been known that fungus is present in the central nervous system of people that have all kinds of diseases like MS and ALS, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, different diseases like that. And if you go to our website later, livediseasefree.com, in the main menu under research, you will see that I have shared a lot of different studies that have been around for a long time, where they have found a higher incidence of candida in MS patients. They've also found the candida and different fungi in the central nervous system of MS patients, and even in the nucleus of the brain cells of MS patients. So why? Like, a big reason, again, I believe, is probably the wireless radiation, but really what offset the whole thing is that there was a time in our life where we used antibiotics, and it doesn't have to be many antibiotics, but if we use antibiotics, that really disrupts our microbiome. We end up with a lot of our good microbes that would protect us from fungal overgrowth. They're diminished or wiped out, and then the fungus is not affected by antibiotics, so it starts to grow and it produces all kinds of poisons. We're going to talk about one of the poisons it can produce that can also cause leaky blood-brain barrier. All right, so I'm just going to, let me see here. Awesome, you guys are there. I just want to make sure, because I know that there's a bit of a time lag. So going back to this study, because it's just crazy what I found today. It's just amazing. So again, it's been known for many, many years that when we have chronic disease, we have fungus in our central nervous system. But what I would really challenge you as I'm sharing this with you is that please understand that fungus is the recycler of the world. Fungus loves to live where there's a lot of garbage, where there's a lot of material that it needs to clean up. And so I'm not saying that MS and Alzheimer's and ALS is caused by fungus, but I'm saying that it needs to be knocked back because it's usually an overgrowth of fungal infections when we are dealing with neurological diseases. But it could just be, and this is what I believe because I've been on this journey for 35 years, keeping myself healthy, but also working with hundreds of people all over the world. It's that when our microbiome is really out of balance and we have all kinds of other parasites also, fungus thrives, right? Because the bigger worms, they are dropping their waste inside of us. They're depositing their bacteria that live inside of them. They're creating this toxic environment. And yes, the antibiotics have definitely helped to bring this about. But if you want to look at those books that I shared with you, I wouldn't buy them because they're really old, they're outdated, but you can probably find some of them in a local library, especially the Yeast Connection. I know that I used to be able to find it in our local library. And it's fascinating that these doctors had so much wisdom 40 years ago, and things haven't changed. Why? Because there's no money in treating candida or other parasites. So again, it may not be that the candida or the aspergillus or the other different types of fungi, they may not be causing MS, but because we're out of balance in our microbes and we have several different parasites, and that suppresses our immune system. So fungus loves to live in immunosuppressed people. And if our microbiome is really out of balance, it really thrives. So it's kind of like which came first, the chicken or the egg? They all need to be knocked back, treated. So I really appreciate Dr. Klinghardt. He's one of the mentors that I study under. I would say that he's my most favorite mentor. Every time he speaks, like it is very consistent with what we have seen in the hundreds of students that we have served over the years. So this is one reason before I move on to this away from the wireless signals, like it's really advisable to, when you go to bed at night, to turn your router off if you can. Turn the wireless signal off in your home. You guys are all sleeping anyhow. Might as well just turn it off and give your body a break. If you're going to use your phone, use some earbuds. If you are having your phone close to you, like if you can have it on airplane mode at night for sure. But I literally talk on a corded phone. I have my computer hooked into an Ethernet cable. I have the Wi-Fi turned off. So yes, I do have a cell phone and I do work behind technology, but I really try to minimize the effect of the wireless radiation. And it's really strong right now, especially with all the 5G. And a lot of us have 5G phones. I don't yet. I'm holding out as long as I can until my phone doesn't work anymore. So what is interesting is that, and I wanted to share, is that with the Wi-Fi, that in a study that I just looked at just before being here, researchers found that it was 10 times easier to transport a certain substance that they wanted to transport into the central nervous system, so across the blood-brain barrier, if they had a RF field present, so the wireless radiation field, if that was present, it was 10 times easier to transport something into the central nervous system as opposed to if they didn't have the wireless radiation present. That's a big thing, 10 times. So that could be why there is a huge significance uptick in people that have all kinds of neurological diseases, right? That could be really impacting our blood-brain barrier, because that's one of the questions I've asked, like, why is it that those of us that have neurological diseases, like, why is our blood-brain barrier compromised? Why are parasites getting through? And the standard of care, they would say, or the standard way that we treat MS, they say, no, it's just your immune cells get activated, they cross the blood-brain barrier, and they're attacking your tissue. And it's like, no, there's parasites present in the central nervous system that our immune cells are attacking. Why are so many getting in there? And the wireless radiation is probably one factor. So wherever you can, decrease the wireless radiation around you. Yes, you can still live with technology, you can still enjoy the benefits of it, but protect yourself, really important. So again, past and recent studies have suggested that fungus, different types of fungi, they play a really important role in multiple sclerosis. And researchers have found fungus in the brain specimens of MS patients. And I've got studies even on my website that I've had up there for years, livediseasefree.com, where you can actually look at that. So this is something that's been known for many, many years. And also, like I said, all the way into the nucleus of brain cells of MS patients. So one fungus that they found is trichosporon, and that one is something that I haven't heard that often, but it is a type of a yeast fungus, like Candida is also a yeast. So there's like molds and there's yeast, and this is a type of yeast, and it was found in the majority of MS patients. Candida was the second most common type of fungus found in MS. And this type of the trichosporin species of fungus, the most common, is just a yeast-like fungus that's found in soil and water. And it's called normal flora. It's normally present in our body. Same with Candida. These fungi normally are present in very, very small numbers, and they don't cause any harm. It's just when they become too populated in our body, then they cause harm. And Candida albicans was isolated from MS. They had higher specific enzymatic activity and were positively correlated with the severity of MS. So the worse a person suffered with MS, the more candida activity was present in that person. And that goes for all kinds of other diseases too, right? It's not just for MS. You'll notice that people that are elderly, people that have significant chronic debilitating diseases, they always have like fingernail or toenail fungus. They've got, dandruff, they've got all kinds of strong symptoms of fungi. So again, fungus is the recycler and it's moving in to start recycling us when we're not ready to go yet. And the evidence supported that Candida species infections is associated with increased chance or probability of having MS. So this is nothing new. It's been reported by doctors. But what is really fascinating, I'll just share too, is not always Candida albicans. They found also Candida glabrata and Candida krusei or krusei. Those are two different species. So there's many different species of Candida, and it's not just one type of Candida that's found in MS. And sometimes people that I coach, they have aspergillus, which is a type of mold. Some people have lived in a moldy home and they have higher amounts of mold in their body. Some have higher amounts of Candida. Some of our students need to treat both. But I do believe that it's really important to treat fungal overgrowth in the body. It's always important to knock it back. So what some of the researchers believe is that very often it's the fungal toxins that really play a role in destroying certain cells that help to protect the blood-brain barrier and also protect and nourish the myelin. So it's not just the fungus, but it's also the toxins they produce. So one of them is gliotoxin, and that's a very potent mycotoxin. It's secreted by fungi like Candida and Aspergillus, and it can contribute to the cerebral invasion of fungi and other parasites by altering blood-brain barrier permeability. So this toxin produced by fungi, which could even be in your gut, it will definitely impact the permeability of our blood-brain barrier. So we've talked in the past about like Clostridia, a certain Clostridia species. Clostridia is a really nasty bacteria, and it can produce this epsilon toxin, which can also really impact the blood-brain barrier, make it leaky. And so can this gliotoxin produced by Candida and Aspergillus and possibly other types of fungi. So this results in a disruption to the blood-brain barrier. Then we get, once the blood-brain barrier becomes compromised, then different microbes that get into our blood, they're able to get into the central nervous system. Then we have more inflammation because our immune system's like, hey, what are these things doing in our central nervous system? We have to go after them and we have to treat them. So it's not that our immune system is just being activated by Candida, but when you have a leaky blood-brain barrier, we know that the central nervous system is not a sterile environment that, again, the research is showing there's fungus. We know from past research I've shared with you that worms developing tapeworm larval cysts, developing juvenile tapeworms, small filarial worms, fungi, different types of bacteria. So that's why the immune system is reacting. That's why we have inflammation. That's why we have the lesions in the central nervous system. And then we have a breakdown of myelin. I even showed you a slide where I think it was Dr. Alan McDonald found the Lyme spirochete in the myelin sheath of MS patients. That's just like, it's there. Like, you don't need any more evidence than that. So if these different fungus or Lyme or worms, if they are close to or if they have infected the myelin, then obviously the immune system's going to go after them, right? They have to get rid of the invader. So the gliotoxin can increase neuroinflammation in the animal model for multiple sclerosis. So what they have found is that they give this toxin to mice to cause them to have a disease that's similar to MS. It's like, oh, interesting, you don't know what causes MS, but you can give mice a version of MS. But they find that when they give the mice this gliotox, or actually when they infect the mice with candida, and then they give them that toxin that would normally give them the MS disease or the MS mouse version of disease, those animals are way sicker because they're also dealing with the candida infection. So they believe that it definitely can increase the neuroinflammation, or they've observed that in their studies that it increases the neuroinflammation of the EAE, that's the animal model of multiple sclerosis, and that even in non-neural sites. So it's not necessarily just by getting the candida into the brain that they're giving these mice a worse case of something similar to MS. It can even be in the gut, right? If they have candida infections in other parts of the body, that can trigger it also. What's really interesting, just before I went on this call, this study was talking about this specific enzyme, and it's chitinase. And anything that ends with an ASE means it's an enzyme, which means it's a protein. And that chitinase helps to break down chitin, which is a part of the fungal wall, cell wall. So bacteria and our cells, we don't have a cell wall, but fungus has a cell wall. So this enzyme it actually breaks down the cell wall of fungi. And elevated chitinase in the spinal fluid is an important biomarker for multiple sclerosis. Can you believe that? Yes, interesting. So, also, there's a couple of other things that are elevated in the spinal fluid of MS. So, there's a calprotectin. That is one substance that's elevated in the spinal fluid of MS patients, and amyloid deposits also are found in the brains of MS patients. Both of these are associated with immunity to fungi. So when our immune system is fighting fungus and it builds immunity to fungus, those two substances are present. The amyloid and the calprotectin are present in the spinal fluid of people of MS patients. So that also suggests that, just a sec here, that also suggests that fungal infections in the central nervous system of MS patients is a critical event in the disease. So it's great that they're doing all of this, but why don't they see if treating fungus could make a difference for MS? Well, that would be really nice. So that calprotectin, that is basically another type of protein, and it's found that calprotectin is found in the stool of people that have ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, colorectal cancer, or other infections. And all those diseases are caused by parasites, by infections also. So if people don't have a lot of this calprotectin present, that means it's a measurement for inflammation. It's probably not the only measurement for inflammation, but if you don't have that, it suggests that you don't have that substance isn't there to cause inflammation. And I don't want to say you don't have inflammation, because you still might have inflammation because other substances can cause it also. And then, although fungi has been detected in the central nervous system of MS patients, attacks on the immune system by fungi in the periphery may also exacerbate MS. And we see this all the time. So we can have our students follow the Live Disease-Free plan, where they are getting ready to treat, they're following the diet, they're getting their carbs down, they feel so much better. And fungi love carbohydrates, sugars, and carbs. Same with bacteria and other parasites. So when you decrease the carbs, you feel a lot better. Then you support the body and you're feeling better. And then as you're treating, and we're really focusing a lot on the gut. Yes, we are treating the central nervous system, but it is harder to treat the central nervous system. But some students, they still may have lesions, but they are completely symptom-free for years. We know that people that are over 50 can have lesions in the central nervous system. We know that people that have Crohn's disease or autism can have lesions in the central nervous system. So the lesions in the central nervous system, I believe, are pockets of inflammation, pockets of infection, but that doesn't mean that that's what's causing all of the attacks. And we see that all the time. So it's really beneficial to correct the microbiome in the gut also. That's the base camp of the problem. And tests show that Aspergillus and Saccharomyces were significantly higher in the gut microbiome of MS patients. So there is a Saccharomyces boulardii, which is a type of yeast, but it actually goes after Candida. So this must have been a different Saccharomyces species. So some can be helpful and some are not helpful. Usually fungus is not very helpful. And alterations to the gut microbiome in MS patients leads to changes in various types of immune cells. So we know that. And I've shared tons and tons of research about that. What's happening in your gut really impacts your nerves. There is this brain gut axis where there's a highway of nerves between your gut and your brain, and whatever's happening in your gut will greatly impact your nerves tremendously. So the antifungal immunity, so like our immune system creating an immune response to fungus, and um, the immune response, like when we're dealing with MS, they largely overlap. No kidding, because it is infection that's causing the increased immune response in multiple sclerosis. They're like, yeah, this activity with, having the immune dealing or fighting fungus. They're only talking about fungus in this one. So the effect or the fact that there is like the immune system is fighting fungus in MS patients, but we also know that the immune system is activated in MS patients. It's like, well, it's all the same. It's because we're dealing with parasites. We're not just fungus, but we do need to treat the fungus for sure. And so there's a special cell, it's called the T cell. There's different types of T cells, but it's a Th17 cell. It's involved in the disease process of MS, but also other different types of autoimmune diseases. And it also plays a really important role in immunity against fungus. So it's helping our body to recover from fungal infections. And recent studies have shown that fungi activate our macrophages, which are like Pac-Man. They're like a cell that just eats different types of parasites, smaller ones. But it also leads to a secretion of all kinds of immune molecules, and they call them cytokines, and there's chemokines. But it's kind of like this signaling. It's molecules that our immune system uses to signal. So different cells are basically active. This is just how our immune system is amazing. It is so incredibly amazing. So certain cells they'll find the culprits early. They'll signal to the rest of the immune system to come in and to go after these infections, especially fungi, different types of bad bacteria, protists and worms. And that's why we're sick. And why is it that the panel of experts around the world that decide how we treat and how we test for MS, but how we treat, and this is for any disease, they all have panels, they all have rules about this is how we're going to diagnose MS, this is how we're going to treat MS. Why is it that they are not interested in this kind of research? They're not interested in finding out what kind of infections could be activating our immune system. Maybe our immune system is not just attacking our nerve tissue for no reason. And I would say, absolutely, our immune system is incredibly intelligently designed. And by the grace of God, we have such an amazing immune system, and our job is not to suppress it, but to support it, to actually knock back fungus. So that's what we're going to talk about next, is like, how can we knock back fungus? Before we do that, let's talk about symptoms. So usually with fungal overgrowth, we've had symptoms for years, and it could be maybe people have their sinuses are plugged a lot, and they may end up with rhinitis or chronic sinus infections. That's a really big sign of fungal overgrowth. So it starts in the gut, and let me backtrack first. So it starts in the gut, and with the gut, we can end up with constipation. That's a really big factor or sign, but other parasites can cause constipation too. But with fungal overgrowth, constipation is definitely a factor. So we can have more gas, we can have constipation, our bowel movements are not regular, and then we feel that we're more fatigued. We can end up with foggy head, we can feel really depressed, right? Some of these neurotoxins that are produced, I've shared on my masterclass training, different toxins that can really make us feel like we were hit by a truck, basically, like we're just really struggling to get through the day. And then other outward signs of fungal overgrowth could be dandruff, that's fungus. We could have had ringworm. We could have jock itch, athlete's foot, fingernail and toenail fungus, rashes on our body, even for women, plugged milk ducts, like when you're nursing and you find that you're nursing and then one milk duct becomes really plugged and it just becomes engorged and it's painful and then it lets and then it moves to the other breast back and forth. That's really common also. So there's all these different signs that we've had fungal overgrowth for years, and these signs are present in people that have neurological diseases, but they're also present in anyone who is getting older. Like fungus is just kind of setting up camp and getting ready to recycle us, which is kind of awful, but that's just the way it is. So and thrush, so if people end up with, maybe you've had kids that have thrush in their mouth, they have a white rash, things like that. So, I should say vaginal yeast infections. Some women get vaginal yeast infections, and it was interesting because I never really had any that I was aware of. Some women don't get vaginal yeast infections, they might just have white, cloudy mucus. It could be other microbes too, but quite commonly it is fungus. So, uh, I did share one study in my book, Become a Wellness Champion, where there was a study where they scraped the sinuses of 200 people that had chronic sinusitis, rhinitis, and they found that like 98%, something like that, really high, it was just fungus. And they said we should call it fungal rhinitis because it's really fungus that's causing all of this congestion in the sinuses. So, those are just some of the symptoms that we may have had for years. So, for myself, when I was a kid, I had a lot of constipation. I had a lot of other parasites too, but I had that. I'm trying to think. I didn't have a lot of symptoms of fungus myself, but a lot of my students do. But I ended up being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when I was 28 years old. Maybe if I would have had it for longer, then I would have had more symptoms. I didn't have uh, fungus in the fingers or toenails. Um, Not a huge amount. Definitely the gut was more where I had symptoms. So I would say yes, the not even the foggy head. Like I was a pretty healthy person, but more gut, constipation terribly. But I was dealing also with a lot of other parasites. So this is where we have to kind of look back at our health history and we understand that maybe the fungus is not like the front runner in bringing us to this place. But when our immune system is suppressed because our microbes are out of balance and we're dealing with several parasites, then we are more immunosuppressed and our immune system is taxed. And then fungus is kind of becoming more abundant inside of us. And yes, they do produce neurotoxins that definitely make matters a lot worse, more immunosuppressive. And so it's just kind of, we've got to knock them all back. If we have worms, treat them, treat the fungus, treat the protists. Protists are another one, single cell parasites that are really common in MS, and bad bacteria also. So we just have to knock them all back. So when we're treating candida, you can work with your doctor and you can get a prescription for, if you feel that you've had a lot more candida symptoms, then something like diflucan, and the generic active ingredient would be called fluconazole. So fluconazole is it works more systemically, that you could get from your doctor. It does require a prescription. The brand name would be called Diflucan. You can probably find fluconazole cheaper than whenever you buy a brand name, it's more expensive. So fluconazole will definitely be more cost effective. If let's say you lived in a moldy home and for years, and that helped to bring you to this place with chronic disease, then you might test well for itraconazole, which the brand name is called Sporanox. So itraconazole is going to be cheaper. That's the generic active ingredient. And then, of course, there's brand names like Sporanox, which would be more expensive. So those are two drugs that work systemically. I'm not sure. I should have checked to see if they do cross the blood-brain barrier. You can definitely check that yourself. There's also nystatin. And nystatin, I used that in the past. My doctor prescribed it. several times. And I think some of the prescriptions are like 500,000 international units up to 4 times a day, depending on the doctor prescribing it. It's better not to get nystatin as a liquid because it contains sugar and yeast love sugar. So don't do nystatin liquid. But nystatin is very safe. It's just works in the gut. It is not works systemically. It's not really metabolized by the liver. So it's just a really safe drug that can be used in like to treat along your digestive tract, candida along your digestive tract. There's some great herbs that are really awesome that you could start with that don't require a prescription. So what I always recommend first is get your carbs down. It'll change your life. You will feel so much better. Follow the Live Disease Free diet. It's really focused on getting the carbs into the sweet spot so that you actually notice symptom improvements. You can get all of the guidelines for the Live Disease Free diet on our website. Go to livediseasefree.com. Under research, you'll find the Live Disease Free diet guidelines. There's a cheat sheet. There's a short 3-minute video, and there's a longer one if you want to know kind of like what I eat for breakfast, lunch, and supper. And that diet will change your life. When you get the carbs low, you stop feeding the fungus and other parasites, you will notice significant symptom improvements. But you got to get your carbs down low enough. We say 30 to 40 total grams of carbs per day. So once you do that, you're feeling a lot better. Then you can start to use some of these antimicrobials. One of my favorites is raw garlic. You can find freeze-dried garlic in tablets or in capsule. I don't know about bulk, but you can definitely find capsules or tablet form. But the most potent that we've found is just when, let's say, before your meal, you just take a cloves of garlic and you chop it up. You don't have to press it or make it minced, but just chop it up fairly fine. Put it on a spoon, then start to eat your food. And then once you have some food in your stomach, then put the spoon of garlic in your mouth, swish it down with water. You don't have to chew it, and then finish eating your meal. And students will start with like a half a teaspoon. Don't start with a lot. Never take raw garlic on an empty stomach. It will burn. You might throw up. It's quite strong. But the raw garlic is really, really antifungal. It's anti-small parasite. It's antiviral. It's anti-Lyme. It's just incredible. A lot of the different practitioners find that it's one of their main go-tos in treating fungus for sure, and smaller parasites. It's not going to get rid of all the parasites, but it definitely is going to help a lot. There's also different types of herbs. So there's olive leaf extract, there's oil of oregano, there's a herb called Pudarco, P-A-U, and then a space, capital D, and then I think it's apostrophe A-R-C-O, Podarco tea. It's a bark, and you can buy the bark. It's just like a brown slivered bark that you can buy in a bag from a health food store, and you can make a tea, and that's really great. So, and I think wormwood too. I don't know if wormwood is extremely antifungal. It's antiparasitic. I'm sure it is antifungal too, but garlic is like a big one, and Podarco tea. So with garlic, don't take it ongoing for long periods of time. It is a blood thinner, so if you are taking blood thinners, pay attention to that. And Podarco, it's something you shouldn't take long term either, but it's a really nice tasting tea. I've always liked it cold or hot. In the summer, you can make it cold. You would drink probably about 3 cups a day of the Podarco tea. And what I do is, for each cup of water that you bring to a boil, like I would do at least like 6 cups of water just to save time. Bring it to a boil, add 6 tablespoons of the slivered brown bark for the Podarco, and then stir it into the water and turn the heat down. So it's not like steeping a tea. You actually boil it gently, like really low heat for probably 20 minutes or so. Then it is medicinal. And then you can just take a strainer and just strain some of the leaves out or the bark out when you're pouring it into a cup. And it tastes really nice. You can keep it in the fridge. You can have it cold or hot. But Podarco is really great. Garlic is great. And the other ones you can rotate to. There's grapefruit seed extract is another one. So there's a lot of different natural herbs that are really helpful. All right, I'm going to see if you guys have any questions. I wanted to ask you if if you have had a lot of symptoms of fungal overgrowth, that you've known that you've had maybe a history of candida infections or dandruff or fingernail, toenail fungus, rashes, plug ducts, thrush, like irritated dry lips, rash in your mouth, all of those different factors are definitely signs of fungal overgrowth. And even like I've noticed people that have a lot of fungal overgrowth, they're very often they're allergic to penicillin too. That's another one that they would be. Okay, I will go to your questions for a few minutes here and answer your questions. Um, hello. If you guys have any questions, I'll just take like 5 minutes here. Hi, Fawn. Hi, Sean. You're so very welcome. Can you test for fungus? You know, you can spend $6,000 to $10,000 or more on testing, and I personally don't think it's worth it. You know, if you have a lot of symptoms of fungal overgrowth, then I would just definitely treat fungus. And I should say, let me backtrack. There is energy testing, and that's what we use. So if you take one sample dose of the common parasite herbs and or parasite drugs, you take that to a chiropractor that does applied kinesiology or to a naturopathic physician that does some type of energy testing. Sometimes they use machines, sometimes they will use muscle testing, and they can tell if it restores and balances your energy. And so it might be fluconazole, it might be itraconazole, it might be nystatin, or it might be the herbs, or it might be a combination. What's really important though is if you're treating other parasites, make sure to never take or check with your pharmacist on this, because this is something we know that fluconazole and itraconazole, they have a lot of negative interactions with other drugs. So please be very careful that, like with our students, they never mix parasite drugs with the fungal drugs. They always keep the fungal drugs separate because they want to make sure that they're not causing any kind of negative interactions. So the ART, AMA, Vega, all of those different types of energy testing is helpful. But honestly, if you've had fungus in the past, you know, and we always look at current and past symptoms. So sometimes we may have had more in the past, but not as much in the recently, because we have been doing things to offset it. But definitely the overuse of antibiotics is really a huge factor of why we have so much fungus growing inside of us. There's other things that will make things worse, make matters worse too. The use of certain drugs, right? Not just antibiotics, but we've talked about hormones, like hormones, taking hormones, whether it's bioidentical or synthetic. It changes our biochemistry in our body. They're very, very powerful. They can cause your blood sugar to be higher, which will feed fungus and other parasites. It can cause, if you're taking supplement or if you're supplementing with hormones, synthetic or bioidentical, it also suppresses the inflammatory immune response, which is kind of acting a little bit like a steroid. And so it's like decreasing the fighting mechanism of the immune system. So you might feel better when you're taking hormones, but then when you stop taking it, you actually feel worse because it's masking the problem. And so it's really, really important that you're very cautious. With our students, they think that they're dealing with hormonal issues, but then they realize that once they treat the parasites, they don't have the day sweats, they don't have the night sweats, they don't have any of these hormonal symptoms. It's the parasites that's causing them, and they're off of the extra hormones, because we do know that they're linked with all kinds of inflammatory conditions like arthritis, etc., cancer. So we have to be really, really careful. I personally would not take them. How many people are successful with this protocol? When MS progresses, is this still effective? Yes. Also, can you reverse damage? So what we have found is that, number one, I can never promise full recovery. And because number one, I cannot control anything that our students do, whether they follow the diet, how they follow it, how they treat. So I have no control over that. But what we have seen in our students is that people that are really disabled, that maybe haven't walked for 5 years or longer, that after several treatment cycles, they are able to start walking again. I shouldn't say walking. They are like using crutches, right? Because they have to build back their leg muscles. So what I say is that when you treat these parasites really well. The fungus, the worms, the bacteria, the protists, when you treat it effectively, the disease will not get worse. You'll have a lot of recovery. You'll have a lot more recovery than you thought possible. And what we're seeing in people that, let's say they've had a hand clenched like for 40 years, they're in the process, they wake up one morning and their hand is open. They can't just use it like I would, but then they start to do rehabilitation working with a physiotherapist, and then they can start to use it for all kinds of things. So it's really, really exciting. There is so much more recovery that we can have that we ever thought possible. Our students are showing that. They're proving that. We had just one student who didn't have MS, but she was bedridden, sick for years, all kinds of diseases. She'd been bedridden for at least a year, she couldn't do anything. She said, my husband did everything. And now she's driving again. She's playing with her grandkids. She's babysitting them. She's swimming with them. She's cooking. She's entertaining. She's doing all that. She was using a walker, and she has such severe pain. So it doesn't matter what disease you're dealing with. Parasites are always and the biggest part of the problem. And again, we're not treating parasites because there's no money in treating parasites. And that is the frustrating part of all of this. Why won't the doctors treat this to help? Our doctors are trained in a certain way. I'm not blaming them. If you go to school for 10 years plus and you're told you're the expert, we don't know what causes this disease that you're learning, or like if you're a neurologist, we don't know what causes neurological diseases. Here's all the research. It's the immune system. It's the immune system. Look at all of our drug research. Like, our drugs are fantastic. They work so well. And then you become a drug rep, right? And that's where we're at right now. And I shared on several occasions, like, look up the document, the McDonald criteria, the McDonald 2017 criteria. Go to the last 2 pages and you'll see at least a page and a half of who has funded this McDonald criteria. And it's all of the companies that are selling the MS drugs. So they are funding how MS is being diagnosed and treated, the rules, how we're deciding we're going to treat it. Conflict of interest? Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you so much, James. So why can't doctors prescribe more antiparasitic drugs? This is because our healthcare system has been hijacked. I really believe that. And I really believe it's no fault of the doctors. They don't know any better. They're told, right, that we don't have parasites in developed countries. You have to go to an underdeveloped country to get parasites. And that is not true at all. So we know that our pets get parasites. The vets encourage us to treat our pets. Well, what's really interesting is that very often I run into pets or into veterinarians that are really, really sick. And I say to them, have you ever treated yourself for parasites? And they're like, no. Like, but you treat all the animals that are sick for parasites? Yeah. Do you think maybe you could have parasites? Because vets usually have a lot of animals in their life too. And their animals get parasites, or even people that are raising horses. Like, I know one vet, lovely man, he's a vet and he's raising horses. And if he would treat parasites, he could actually just continue riding horses for a very long time. But the parasites make us disabled. So right now our healthcare system is hijacked. Our doctors are not trained. They have to follow the rules. In countries like Canada, it's really tight. Our tests are very poor. The best parasitologists have said we're picking up probably 10% of the parasites if we're doing different types of testing. So like the stool tests save your money. I mean, if it's covered, you can have it done, but it's not going to show you the parasites that are causing your greatest symptoms. So the whole system is out of whack. So it's going to take grassroots effort of people becoming aware, talking to their doctors. They're joining the academy, they're getting their life back, and then it just snowballs. More and more people are like, well, of course you can treat parasites. We've got several people that followed this plan years ago, and they're writing books now. They're opening up clinics. They're starting podcasts. So the truth is getting out, not fast enough for me. And I really hope and pray that before I finish my life, that before the end of my life, that doctors are going to be allowed to treat parasites early so that people never end up in this situation where they have a lot of chronic disease. Okay, last couple of questions. Brian, you're 28 years old and recently you were diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. You've been bitten by multiple ticks and you have had some more serious fungal skin infections. Which direction should I go? So we personally don't believe that you should start with like looking for Lyme and treating Lyme. We know that Lyme can infect us with the vector-borne infections, which are more than just Borrelia. There's many infections that travel together. We've seen people that have just gone and started working with Lyme litter doctors. They went on lots of antibiotics and they're sicker than ever and more disabled than ever. What we do is we treat things in an order, and this is what my mentors do. The same thing is you treat the biggest parasites first. So if you have larger worms, you want to knock those back first. A lot of people with MS have roundworms. We're seeing a lot more and more of these intestinal flukes, which I did not even know about them. We know about roundworms, we know about tapeworms. I learned about like flukes in university, but very lightly, didn't really know much about them. They're very common in the blood, schistosomiasis, causing a lot of bladder issues, which is really common in MS and other diseases. But the intestinal flukes cause a lot of problems, a lot of inflammation in the body. So if you have bigger worms and you just focus on the little bacteria like Borrelia, you're not going to get the recovery that you want. You have to treat the big and then you work your way down treating the small. So first we get ready to treat. So you were just diagnosed with MS. So just the prep phase, the diet and supporting the body, you may find that you're almost symptom free with that. And you're just making the parasites a lot less active. Then once the parasites are a lot less active, then you start to treat. And we do cycles. So we'll hit the larger worms and protists for about 14 days. Then we will hit the fungus for about 10 days. And then we will take a break week. And when we take the break, we're still using herbs. We're also using oxygen, really cost-effective oxygen therapy, and we're using it orally, and we can do enemas, and we're clearing them out, and it's life-changing. So if you're just newly diagnosed, it still takes work, but it's a lot easier to treat the parasites now than if you wait until you're disabled. It takes a lot more work the longer we've been sick and the more disabled that we are. So I personally would just like watch my masterclass training. It explains all the steps that we take. It's really important. And our students test well for 3 to 5 parasite drugs. And it's really hard because with a lot of the different parasite drugs, they have antifungal properties too. They also have antibacterial properties. And so maybe one drug is mainly used for treating tapeworms, but it also has antiviral properties. So there's an overlap, and we really don't care. We know that to try to figure that out is going to take years and years because there's hundreds of different types of bacteria that can cause disease, hundreds of different types of worms and protists. So that can be overwhelming. So it's a lot easier to just kind of treat the groups of them. And luckily the treatments, they will work across the board. So if you have had a lot of fungal symptoms in the past, a lot of the herbs would also help to treat Borrelia, would also help to treat bad bacteria. So we love the herbs for things like bacteria, but for treating the worms and for treating like the bigger worms and protists, by themselves, the herbs are not enough. The parasite drugs are incredibly helpful, but by themselves, they're not enough. So we use a combination of parasite drugs and herbs, antimicrobial herbs, and the oxygen therapies. And all that together is really where the magic happens, where people have life-changing experiences and they have more improvements in their disability that they ever thought they could. Again, I can't promise full recovery, but it is really quite shocking that people that haven't walked for years, maybe after 10, 12 treatment cycles, are starting to use crutches. And I'm like, whoa. So we know that balance can definitely be corrected. We know that spasticity goes away. We know that vision can improve a lot. It really depends, but a lot of people have been able to save their driver's license. Diplopia, where the eyes are wandering, that totally resolves. We had a lot of students where that resolves. the fatigue, the brain fog, the memory issues, the anxiety. Some people have over the top anxiety that goes away. The depression goes away. Of course, all the rashes and all the fingernail and toenail fungus, all of that goes away. But people are more concerned about their brain and their mobility. And those are the things that your body is a miracle. If you support it, you'll be surprised at how much recovery you can have. It'll be more than you thought was possible. So just watch my masterclass training, Brian. It tells you all the steps. It will be linked to this video. It'll be either above or below it. That talks about all the steps. And if you want to chat, for any of you that want to chat with me to see if it's a good fit the program, we have a time where you and I can chat. Stephanie, so good to see you again. Awesome. So what role does fungus play in Parkinson's? It is all the same. So what we're noticing is that um, it's different types of, even different types of species of fungi, right? So we don't always have exactly the same worms. Sometimes they're pretty common, like the candida is pretty common, but I would say that the fungus would play the same role in Parkinson's. Again, it's not going to be the only microbe that's causing problems with Parkinson's. I believe that again, there's lots of research I've shared in the past where if you just do some Google searches, you'll see that Parkinson's is really linked with a disruption in the microbiome, just like with MS, ALS, PLS, Alzheimer's, all of that. And the parasites do get into the central nervous system. They definitely do. But again, a lot of the problem is still in the gut. And so just treating, actually, it's really neat too. Like I have one student, we do our live calls on Tuesdays, and one student is recovering from ALS, like amazing. And he was using a parasite drug for tapeworms, and he found he can walk a lot better and he has less pain and less stiffness from using a tapeworm medication. And I know that ALS, some practitioners feel that maybe a Clostridia bad bacteria is involved also, but then you look up that this drug, it's called niclosamide, it also helps to treat other types of, I think it even has antiviral. Yes, it does. I think it's even anti-COVID. So like there's a lot of applications for different treatments that overlap. So again, so for Parkinson's, for ALS, for PLS, for MS, whatever disease, it's always the same thing. You stop feeding the infections, you support the body, you get energy tested to see which treatments are testing best for you, and then you treat. And it's like depends on where the parasites are located in the body, what types of parasites you have, that determines what disease you have. And maybe in 10 years, if we ever start to spend a little bit more time in research, we'll say, with MS, they usually have these 4 or 5 parasites, but this one is a big culprit, and it could be the same with Parkinson's, et cetera. But it could also be the location of the parasites too, right? All right, so James, what is the best for toenail fungus? Well, it really depends. Again, it's all the steps in the plan. Like if you don't treat the gut, if you don't decrease the fungus in the gut, you'll constantly be getting problems in your fingernails, toenails, rashes. It's all those other external symptoms of fungal overgrowth. So definitely want to treat the fungus in the gut. And then it depends what you want to use. There's certain things you can apply to your toes, but you can work more systemically with antifungals that doctors can prescribe. But the toenail and fingernail fungus go away when you treat the fungus. And those are all symptoms or signs of really improving your health and your quality of life. You definitely don't want to have, or you want to limit or try to get rid of symptoms of fungus, because that just means that you're healthier and you're going to live longer. Hi, Cameo. Hi, Fawn. You had a patch of eczema, and I always thought eczema was fungus too, and it could easily be. It could be linked with other parasites too. So finally, upon treating fungus, it went away. I believe that, absolutely. So I think too that, if you're following my work, we talk a lot about the roundworms and the tapeworms and the protists and bad bacteria. But I think it's really that was a refresher today to remind us the importance of knocking back fungus. And, if these doctors, again, if you joined us a little late, I wanted to share these books with you again, but 40 years ago, these doctors already knew. So Dr. William Crook, so the yeast connection, there you go. And then this is a second one. So these are written by medical doctors. The Missing Diagnosis by Dr. Orion Truss, and Candida by Dr. Luc de Shepper. These are old books. You can hardly, they're getting worn out. They've been sitting on my bookshelf. And then last but not least, who's a Canadian doctor, Dr. Rona, and he is the Complete Candida Yeast Guidebook. And he is an amazing Canadian doctor. Again, he's been I don't know if he's retired now, but he actually was practicing when I was diagnosed with MS, which is 35 years ago. I know he was practicing recently, but amazing doctor. So these hero doctors, I call, they knew 40 years ago that fungus, in particular Candida, was really present with disease. And when they treated Candida, that a lot of their patients went into remission. And so fungus plays a really significant role in chronic disease, and we do want to treat it. And then we want to make an environment inside of our body so that fungus doesn't really love to grow. So this is where, if we control our sugars and we control our carbs, that once we're well, we can have some healthy carbs, but maybe we won't eat like what we used to eat, and we won't binge on the sugar anymore. And then maybe we will start to eat certain foods regularly that are antifungal, like the raw garlic, for example, and other different herbs. And then just really paying attention, right? Maybe periodically, once a year, knocking it back, but not just fungus. Making sure that we treat roundworms, that we treat tapeworms, that we treat flukes, intestinal flukes, protists, etc. So herbs are really helpful for certain things, absolutely, but there is a really great benefit in using and pharmaceuticals for treating parasites, absolutely. So one last question, and then I'm going to let you go. We went a little longer this time. So Patty, I don't understand how we know what parasites to treat if we have no way to test for them. So that's called energy testing. So I did share that at the beginning or a little bit earlier. Basically, we can't figure out which parasites we have, but we can figure out which treatments test the best for us through energy testing. It could be you have to look for a chiropractor that does applied kinesiology, or you can find a naturopathic physician that does some kind of energy testing, muscle testing, or they use machines. And if they take a sample of the treatment and they put it in either on a metal plate or they put it against your body, they can look for, or they can sense, whether it's machine or their muscle testing, if there's changes in your energy. And that's how they do it. So they'll say, yes, this drug tests well for you. No, this one not. And then if you test well for, let's say, 2 or 3 parasite drugs that treat roundworms, you probably have roundworms. If you test well for 2 or 3 drugs that treat tapeworms, you probably have tapeworms. And so we're kind of doing it backwards or a different way, because it's just not worth spending the money on parasite testing right now. It's just, you can do it, but you'll be very disappointed. It's not going to show. And then your doctor will say, you don't have parasites. And yeah, right, whatever. That is not true. All right, so I'm going to let you guys go. We have gone on long enough. So thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really hope that this has helped you. I've given you some tools. Make sure to change your diet. Make sure if you're feeling better with changing the diet and you've had a lot of candida symptoms, you can try some of these herbs like the raw garlic. Start small, start with small amounts, and then you can make sure you have food with it. If you're on any kind of medication, please check with your pharmacist, right? If you're on a heavy blood thinner and you're doing like a tablespoon of garlic with each meal, it's going to make your blood thinner. So be careful, be wise, right? But just things like that can really help. But when you're at the place where you're like, I think that I'm dealing with more than just fungus, I wouldn't be surprised if I have other parasites. Make sure to watch my masterclass training. And if you feel that you need support in treating parasites, that's what I can help you to do in the Live Disease-Free plan. So then watch my masterclass training. You can book a time to chat with me. When you book the time, make sure to go over the coachathon, because we'll send you the coachathon and that explains the steps in a lot more detail. So some people just join without even talking to me, but I still want to talk to you because we're going to start this journey together. It's going to be life changing for you. Once it's kind of like going to school. And once you learn this skill, you'll have it for the rest of your life. You'll know how to manage the parasites so that they never get out of control, so that you don't end up with chronic disease, because they are the biggest cause of all chronic disease. So if you find this information I'm sharing with you helpful, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us to get the word out. And otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful week. We will talk to you next week. Take care and bye-bye for now.